Hello everyone, welcome to Coach Ice Academy. This is Ajay Shah, and in this class, in this video, we are going to discuss an actual question of UPSC. And this question was in UPSC Prelims 2017. And UPSC was interested in knowing the status of right to vote. So there were four options, and you have to choose one among them, that whether right to vote is a legal right, it's constitutional right, it's fundamental right, or whether it is a natural right. So there is a confusion in this question, and many people believe that right to vote is a legal right, and some believe that right to vote is a constitutional right. So in this video, we are just going to decode this question, and we will analyze all the options, and we will see what exactly is the status of right to votes. So since we are talking about right, so let us first define what is right. So right is nothing but right is an entitlement, right is a claim. And whenever we speak about right, then there has to be some source of that right. For example, natural right, social rights, then economic rights, political rights, and also something like religious rights. So depending on the sources, we basically define a particular right. So now let us see the options. So the last option is about natural right. So what is natural right? So natural right is nothing but natural rights are those rights which have been given to us by the nature itself. For example, right to life will be a natural right because we have been given this right to life by the nature itself and not by the constitution or the state. Then we have fundamental rights. So when we say fundamental right, then fundamental right has a very specific meaning. Fundamental right means the rights which are mentioned in the Constitution in the part 3 right from Article 12 to Article 35. For example, Article 19, that is freedom of speech and expression, will be a fundamental right. Now, what is constitutional rights? Constitutional rights are those rights which find mention in the Constitution. That means if a right has been mentioned in the Constitution, then we will call that right as a constitutional right. For example, right to property under Article 300A will be a constitutional right because that has been mentioned in the Constitution. Now, what is legal right? So, legal right is nothing but legal right is that right which has been recognized by law of the land. For example, consumer rights. So in India, consumers are having some kind of rights. So all those rights will be legal right because that finds mention in a act. Now let us see about right to vote. So we will first start with this option, that is natural right. So obviously it is very easy to understand that voting has nothing to do with nature, and voting is something which is a modern phenomena, a modern right, and so we will reject this natural right, and right to vote is not a natural right. Now let us see fundamental rights. So I told you that fundamental rights are those rights which have been mentioned in part 3, that is article 12 to article 35. And in this part 3, there is no mention of right to vote, so right to vote is also not a fundamental right. But one might argue, one might say that right to vote is also a kind of expression, and so right to vote is a fundamental right because right to vote is when you vote you also express your views, and so it is a fundamental right under article 19 of Indian Constitution. But that is only a liberal interpretation, and since that is not directly mentioned, and so we will say that right to vote is certainly not a fundamental right. Now let us see, the confusion is between these two, legal right and constitutional right. So let us see the first option, legal right. So right to vote has been mentioned in Representation of People Act 1951. And so this is absolutely a legal right because it finds its name in a act, that is the Representation of People Act 1951. Now whether right to vote is a constitutional right. So right to vote has been mentioned in Article 326 of Indian Constitution, and so it is bound to be a constitutional right. So right to vote is a legal right also, and it is a constitutional right also. But UPSC demand that you have to choose only one option. So let me explain you by the use of a diagram. So I'm drawing a diagram. This is a small circle, and say this small circle represent fundamental right. This is a bigger circle, and say this bigger circle represents constitutional right, and this is even a bigger circle, and this bigger circle, the biggest one, it represents legal right. Fine. So I repeat this point. This is a fundamental right, this is constitutional right, and this is basically legal right. Now let us pick any right in the fundamental rights, that is, say for example, Article 21. So now what is Article 21? Article 21 is a fundamental right because it it has been mentioned in part 3. Now, Article 21 is also a constitutional right because that has been mentioned in the Constitution. And Article 21 is also a legal right because law will protect your Article 21, and that has been recognized by the law of the land. So in crux, Article 21 is fundamental right, constitutional right, and legal right also. But if we have to choose among these three rights, then what we are going to choose? We are going to say that Article 21 is a fundamental right, and we will reject constitutional right also, and we will reject this legal right also. Similarly, take the example of Article 300A, that is right to property. Now, what is right to property? Right to property is a constitutional right because it has been mentioned in the Constitution. But right to property is not a fundamental right. But again, right to property will be a legal right. So right to property is both constitutional right and legal right. But if given option, then we will say right to property is what? It's a constitutional right. Now let us take the example of consumer rights. So consumer rights in India, they are not fundamental rights and they are not even constitutional right, but consumer rights are legal rights. So similarly, we will take the example of right to vote. So right to vote has been mentioned in Article 326. And so this will not be a fundamental right. So right to property will be constitutional right also and legal right also. But since we have to choose among between these two options, that is constitutional right and legal right, so obviously right to vote will be constitutional right. So this option B is the correct answer. So hope I am very clear. Thank you very much.